Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. It's a podcast for people who are interested in freelance writing, books, writing books, and all the intel behind publishing decisions from agents, editors, authors, and everyone. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, and Writing That Gets Noticed is also a Substack where I share craft advice and also my series, Musings on Magazines, the story behind the story, where I go behind the scenes with a guest to talk about the magazine days of the 1990s and early aughts when I was a magazine editor. Today, my guest is Hyeseung Song, who wrote the memoir Docile, Memoirs of a Not-So-Perfect Asian Girl. And let me tell you a little bit about her. Hyeseung Sung is a first-generation Korean-American painter, writer, and teacher. She is the author of Docile, Memoirs of a Not-So-Perfect Asian Girl, about an Asian-American woman's struggle with self-worth and mental illness. Docile was called a savagely beautiful memoir by David Henry Hwang and a revelation by Chloe Cooper-Jones. The audiobook was a best at Apple and a Korean language edition released in 2025. Raised in Texas, Song studied philosophy, languages, and creative writing at Princeton University. She pursued dual postgraduate degrees at Harvard in law and philosophy before dropping out to study painting in New York. Her paintings are held in private collections internationally. Song was at the Breadloaf Writers Conference this summer as a nonfiction fellow. She is currently at work on a meta-memoir about the ethics of writing about other people, revision, and the failure of translation, linguistic, psychological, and literary, that occurred after her father died unexpectedly after Docile's publication. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So tell me a little bit about Docile and how it came together.
Yes. So a long time ago when I was in college, I was struggling a lot with my mental health. And I had a really good conversation with a dean of the college who sort of opened this possibility that I had never thought of before, which was basically to leave college for the time being. And I went home to Houston where my parents lived, and they were sort of horrified. They're the first generation Korean American immigrants, and their kid who had gone off to Princeton comes home, says she's not feeling college right now, and they sort of flip out. And my parents sent me to Korea, back to Korea, sort of bootstrapping measure. So I lived there for a year during the IMF, the International Monetary Fund bailout of South Korea. And it was interesting when I was living there because a lot of the existential and financial self-interrogation that the country was going through was very paralleled inside of me, these existential questions about what I wanted to do with my life and I had a lot of insights about myself. So when I came back to America and I went back to Princeton, I sort of took to the page and started writing these stories about what it was like that I was not Korean, maybe that was an insight that I had. And I wasn't maybe American in the way that a lot of people thought of Americans being, but I was this third distinct separate thing, Korean American, that I had to parse and create for myself. And writing about this brought something new, was basically orienting around the narratives around my family and the kind of stories about my family that I was thinking about. And during that time when I was at Princeton, I had a creative writing instructor, a very young man who had really overnight amazing and well-deserved success, Jeffrey Eugenides, who wrote The Virgin Suicides. And he was really a great mentor to me during that time. He was a fun and young professor of writing, and he was writing, I think, what would become Middlesex at the time. And we all loved this class. But what I was writing during that time were sort of thinly veiled narratives about my family, even though it was sort of a fiction class. Those first chapters of Docile were just imported from that time when I was 19, 20, writing these stories. But, there was a long time between writing those stories and actually getting a book deal and like thinking of myself as a writer and gestating in that way, because I went to graduate school, as you know, from reading the book. I went to graduate school and law school and did a lot of other things, really deep diving into sort of disciplines that I was not super passionate about, but as an immigrant, as an eldest daughter, was really trying to immerse myself for the sake of my parents, basically, and then leaving, and I became a painter in New York, and I was painting and made a career of painting and have been doing visual art now for decades. So it wasn't until the pandemic, when there was a lot of Asian hate in Brooklyn and it was hard to get on the subway, that I ended up not going into my art studio much. And that was the time when I finished my manuscript. It had been many years since that class at Princeton where I was writing about my parents. And then I got an agent and a book deal really fast. And that's sort of the story of how everything went. And then the book came out in 24.
So, a lot of what you write about, and I guess maybe the central question of the memoir, is tied up in the immigrant experience. And that is something I think common to the immigrant experience. Parents come here, they want to keep their child safe. They've struggled. There are struggles in the beginning. And so they make themselves, in the case of your mom, Amma, said, I am everything to you, and I will not only feel your pain, I will feel your happiness, I will feel everything for you. But that also elevates the importance of the parent. And it also has another effect of not giving the child at that time agency, a feeling like I can step out of this cocoon and have my own agency, my own voice, my own thoughts. No, that's scary to the parent who has the power. And it's also scary to the child if it's starting in childhood, because there is something about the power of love, even if it's toxic or unhealthy or self-fulfilling for the parent. Do you feel that that part of your experience is the part that led you to the mental illness struggles, or do you feel it was something in your body, in your genetics?
I think the agency immigration story is interesting because with immigrants, especially, like I was the oldest child of three, and I actually was born in Korea. So people sometimes call me the 1.5 generation. I'm not the first generation, really, because I was so young when I came, but I guess technically I'm the first generation because I was on the plane coming over. But culturally, my Korean has undergone such attrition, and culturally, in some ways, I might not really be Korean the way my parents were, but I would say I'm 1.5. But as the elder, especially daughter, we feel a lot of enmeshment. We do have agency. I had a lot of agency as a young child. Like I was translating for my parents. I knew much more than I really should have at that young age. I knew how much we had in our bank account at any 1 minute. I knew how much my parents paid for everything. Things that if I had a child, I would want the child not to know those things to sort of protect the child from that burden of information. So in some ways, the agency is inappropriate, right? Like we have too much agency in some ways and not enough agency in another. Like my mom really thought of her life as riddled with global mistakes, which is very painful, right? So she was very fearful, especially with the immigrant experience. You have a lot of fear because there's not such a huge support network and family around you to sort of unfurl the way or grease the way to make it easy on you, right? She was protecting me because she loved me. This was her way. But I would say that I knew always in my heart what I was, which was an artist. I knew those things. And it was a question of how was I going to execute or bring that about, right? And I think something that we are told a lot, and I would say this is true for a lot of Korean American writers, because a lot of us were lawyers or doctors or something else before we became writers, is that we are told that, oh, I see you, you are really artistic, but let's make that art your hobby, and you will have this sort of insulation insurance from terrible things happening to you by being a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer. And I think in some ways that makes sense, but I wish that my mom had looked at me and thought, you're so talented, you can be successful and make a living, and you not have to hone down your art and the time that you give to your art to live in this world.
You're constantly breaking free of the Asian stereotype. Was that the intention of putting this as the title?
Yeah, so to go back to your sort of the second part of your question earlier about the mental health, I think of the book a lot as like, of course, mental health, we can't really parse and pull apart what is genetic or environmental or some combination of the two. But I do think the story of the mental health is being very, very caught up in this idea of having erased what I knew about myself, that I knew very much that I was this artist, and like not denying that. And there's only so much you can deny and then try to move full throttle through some other discipline or other path and barrel down that other path without having consequences for yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually. And so I think of the mental health piece of the story is really like, this is what can happen if you don't take the path that was meant for you, especially if you know what that path is. And for me, as an immigrant, I think a lot about, we think we live in scarcity a lot, and also in stage capitalism, we think of living in scarcity with the things that we have and have to achieve to be loved and matter and live in the world. And I think in the zeitgeist, we think immediately of like Amazon.com kind of abundance being the opposite of scarcity. If I just achieve more, get more, have more money, then I'll be even more loved. It's sort of like a one-to-one kind of ratio. But the sort of moral of the story is really the opposite of scarcity is not abundance. It's actually to step off and eschew that kind of one-to-oneness, that line, and say, it doesn't matter what I do, what do I achieve, what I fail to do or win, I am enough and deserve this kind of love, especially self-love. And I think that was the thing that was hard always when I wasn't being reminded of my essential nature, my fulsomeness, which is the main reminder that comes when I make art, is that I am powerful and I am okay in and of myself. So the artistic message is always, yes, of course, it's great to produce some art, but the practice of, the practice of making art is to feel full and powerful and curious and all the things that are wonderful and have nothing to do with scarcity and nothing to do with abundance.
It's funny because years ago there was a test that we took in high school that would tell, where you should go. And I always considered myself a creative person. And it said, yep, you should be a lawyer. You have no idea how many people I've talked to in my life who became lawyers and have this secret creative side that now they're either retiring or they did their lawyering and they want to write a book, or they're pursuing music or Broadway or something. It's just, I wonder where those two coalesce. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, now I have so many friends having gone to law school. I have so many friends who became lawyers. And I know that we are not monoliths. They have other talents, some of which are secret and some of which are not. And I think the thing is between me who left law school and the people who stayed is that sort of cost benefit analysis, going to law school and being a lawyer and enjoying it, that didn't seem psychically painful to them. They were like, okay, I can do this. It's good enough. And I think for me, it felt so existentially horrible that the only thing I could do was to leave.
So to me, it was interesting. The first time you went to the short-term
The stew, yes.
studio, you were doing your charcoal drawings and you were struggling to find your identity because later on you say that you did many, many drawings of your face. Can you talk a little bit about that process? And then I want to get back to the writing of the book, but book and writing, it's art and you're an artist. So it's all part of that expression.
Yes. When I was in art school, every week we would make, usually on a Wednesday, we would make a portrait of somebody who either came to the studio or we like sometimes if we didn't have a model, we would run around like the Upper East Side where the school was and find someone off the street. And we would say, hey, do you want $60 to sit for 3 hours or 4 hours? And we're just going to paint your face. And so we saw lots of different kinds of people, but once in a while, a student would have to sit. And I kept that practice up after I left school, just sort of playing your scales if you played an instrument. It was a way to make something, maybe it's not art, it was sort of to keep up the practice, keep the technique up. And the easiest person to paint was yourself, but it was also the hardest because you have your own ideas about yourself. And so, I mean, I think this is a fantastic analogy to memoir because you are the subject as well as the artist, right? Trying to depict yourself. And sometimes we think, oh, like because we are living the life, it's going to be the easiest to depict. But sometimes the distance and we have so many blind spots, it can be very, very hard.
I was wondering if you could read that small section on page 287.
Yeah, sure. Whenever I was at a loss in the studio, I cleared the easel and made a self-portrait. There were so many I painted. Me with the blood red horizon in the background, me in a small square, defiant. At some point in the course of making the portrait, I looked into the mirror so long I could no longer recognize the genetics, history, culture, and place that made me me. I was simply lines and shapes, light and darkness, like anyone else. The human categorizations fell away, jawline sneakily square. The eyes the writers of so many books have lazily described as almond-shaped, though they look nothing like the nut. The black hair that once a girl in Texas asked to touch to see how dry and coarse. And for a second, my fundamental self, the thing that didn't need things and existed already full and whole inside, came into focus. Happiness needs a quest, and in that quest to become visible and matter to others, I had lost appearing and mattering to myself. In my life, I had tried to be a great daughter, a great student, a great wife, an American, a Korean, even a great artist, and through these pursuits, I had always chased an ought, forgetting to revel in what I actually already was.
Ah, that's so beautiful.
Thank you.
There's so much visceral movement in that section, and it just encapsulates, I think, all the themes that you talk about in your book. And I could tell it's an emotional moment for you as well, because it's looking back, looking forward. I believe at the time your marriage had dissolved. So Nate was a caretaker, right? He took care of you in your episodes, in your depression. You wrote about him. Did you change his name?
Yes, I have a lot of respect and still, I mean, I can't put it any other way, but I still have a lot of love for this person. He was very good to me. I think we were not each other's person. We were very young, and I think there was a lot of pressure on both of us from various sides, some of which are elucidated in the memoir, others which have receded into the background of the world. But I would say that that was the hardest part to write because I didn't want to hurt him with my depiction. So, yes, almost everyone's name and identifying characteristics have been changed for the purposes of privacy. I would say that my parents and my sister and my brother are basically the people who their identifying characteristics were not changed, their names were not changed.
Well, Arthur comes off rather well in your book.
Oh, you know what? I did change my brother's name at the last minute. So Arthur is not my brother's name, and I'm writing a second memoir right now in which I sort of talk about how that all went down. But I'm glad you think he came off fine. I think a lot of people who have read this book have mirrored back to me that I appear emotionally subjugated to the character Nate and also my obligations to the real person behind, who is Nate, that it looks like I feel a lot of love for this person, but also a little bit of guilt because I idealize this person so much. But I would say that's probably true, but it's also, I think, who I was at the time of being married to this person. I was idealizing him. I really put him on a pedestal. I loved this person through a particular lens that was refracting in a particular way, and it wasn't necessarily seeing the person dimensionally. And I think you are so right to point out the aspect of caretaking. I think there is a part in the book where I talk about when I was in mental distress and he had to leave his work and take care of me. And then I became his whole world. And then as I got better, I didn't want to bother him at all. So we spent no time with each other. So it was either like he was all in or he was not all in. He was at work 100%. So he was all there or not there at all. And so it was very based on obligation. And like I was trying to pay him back for the time that he spent with me by saying, hey, I'm feeling better. Go and do work. Don't come home. Don't worry about me. Don't spend time with me.
So it wasn't integrated. Was that hard to write about him, about that time in your life?
That was probably the hardest thing that I wrote. I kept thinking, am I writing past a certain point? Sometimes I get audience questions about how long the book went on because, as you know, and you're an expert, a lot of memoirs are like 2, 3, 4 years of the memoirist's life. And it's very, very sharply bookended. But this book starts from after me immigrating to about the age of 40. It's like 40 years of a story. And as you said, the story is a lot about immigration and mental health and worthiness. And sometimes audience members will say, well, why didn't you just end the book when you are in victory, when you're married to your astrophysicist husband, when you are showing at the gallery in New York? Why don't you end there? And I see I missed the point, or they missed the point, that the book only has, I hate saying it's a redemptive arc, but you only see the point of it all if I lose everything and I can still remain intact.
Yes. I mean, at the very end, I don't want to read the exact end, but it's a reminder that you go on. And your heart is broken or might have been broken, but you will go on. Your sense of self had been fractured along the way, but you will go on. And I think that's more powerful because it brings it back to the idea of agency and creativity and making chaos work for you as a creative person. I mean, I think there's a lot of connections between the idea of chaos and the idea of creativity. Do you have thoughts on that?
I like that you brought in the word chaos because it has a sort of negative connotation, or someone, I think the Gen Z uses it a little pejoratively, but life is chaos. Life is chaos. So we have to look at it as fodder for the things, messages, and the stories that we want to make out of it. You can't sustain chaos for long, long periods of time. Otherwise, it's too much. You have to have quiet to extract from the chaos. But my agent, he read the final manuscript before it went to press, and he was like, the ending is precarious. And I thought, oh my God, that's bad. I didn't like the P word. I was scared. Then I thought, precarious being sort of like chaos too. 40 years old, that's when the book ends, or 39 or 38, that's when the book ends. Of course, there's so much more life, so much more to live, so many more mistakes to make and chaos to deal with.
So I see chaos as connected to creativity. The world came out of chaos.
I think what resonated the most from what you were saying to me is just being able to sort of ride the waves and then also come onto shore and make something from that ride, right? But it's not as differentiated a process as I think. or as I'm saying, I don't think it's like, oh, you experience and then you go into your studio and create, make a painting or make a memoir. I think our subconscious is working, or unconscious is working a lot more than we understand. And to go back to the idea of agency, neuroscience these days shows that the neurons are firing, the atoms and all of the particles in our brain, that everything is happening before we even lift up our hand. And then we have a story later on that, oh, I lift up my hand and then I made the decision. You made the decision before you ever lift up your hand.
And, the other thing with creativity, it's not just a free-flowing thing. There could be structure within the creativity because writing a book, a memoir, is also about structure. So here, you're taking 40 years of a life, you're putting it into chapters and something like 9 parts. So how did you decide to break up the chapters and still have a forward trajectory with your story?
Yeah, that's a great question. My first monster draft of Docile was a memoir and essays. It was very much propelled by this question of me as a problem and something to solve. And what did I do to solve the problem of myself? And the first chapter was to be a great daughter, then a great student, then a great American, then a great artist, then a great wife. So, sort of the list, the serial commas that I was reading aloud from that excerpt that you asked me to read, that is all integrated from this first monster. I mean, it was like 100,000 words draft that I wrote. And I remember printing out that draft, Estelle, and it was probably like a foot thick, and reading it and realizing that what it read like was great daughter, great wife, great. It was very like a car going over potholes. It's not something that even I wanted to read, and it was my life and my book. So I knew that I had to do something different with it. And I thought about the idea of chronology. There's lots of different ideas about time and perspective in memoir, right? In the memoir landscape, so many people are doing such different things with this in craft. Time, like Jeannie Vanasco, her memoirs sort of tell the story of the writing of the memoir while she's doing the memoiring, which is pretty cool. Who else? The Night Parade by Jamie Nakamura Lynn. She's has a speculative memoir, as does Carmen Maria Machado, who writes a lot. Time is sort of nonlinear. Lydia Yuknavitch writes time as experience of her in water as swimming because it's nonlinear and comes in fragments. And so there's so many wonderful memoirists doing interesting things about time. For me, I guess the idea of starting from the beginning and going to this end and having organized principles around sort of like novel, not like things that I pulled from the novels that I liked, was really exciting for me. It put a lot of burden on me to elide and compress or figure out what doesn't make it into the story because it was, as you know, was almost 40 years. So each section is organized a lot around a different geographical location. Like first chapter, Sugarland, second part is Memorial or Houston, Princeton, those things. And it just kind of worked out that way. I didn't mean for it to be like that. I mean, those different sections don't have the geographical location as the name. It's sort of what I was getting out of being in that geographical location turned out to be the title of the section, but it kind of beautifully worked that way. I didn't have to do anything artificial for it.
I love that. That's really a great organizing principle. And you also keep the story moving forward with that.
I will say one thing, the book has been very healing in a lot of respects. I talked at the beginning of our conversation about this Korean American identity that I'm parsing, and I remember being in mixed spaces and then seeing another Asian American woman or a Korean American woman and feeling as a young person very inflamed and nervous by this forced comparison that I thought our being in adjacent spaces in the same room was going to bear. I think the book has been so fantastic because it starts conversations with other women like me, Asian American women, and also women who have been othered. And just by being a woman, we are, not the mainstream. So the conversations have been fantastic. And thank you for this conversation.
And there haven't been a lot in the memoir realm of mental illness talked about by the AAPI community, right? This is groundbreaking in so many ways as well. You talked about writing another memoir that came to you after losing your father. Can you talk a little bit about that next work? And are you using any of the things that you took out in revision or in cutting or in writing in the next memoir?
Basically, I was launching my book. The book had come out, and my dad had felt extremely fraught about this book, about Docile. And we talk a lot about the ethics of writing about people, but I really think a lot about the ethics of writing the people that I loved or love. And I think I spend a lot of mental energy, labor with the Nate part of the story. Even though Nate and I are like the real Nate is and I are not in touch anymore, I spent a lot of time thinking about him. I think I spent a little bit less time interrogating what I was doing with my dad in Docile. And I think the reason why was, and I didn't know this at the time, Estelle, but he loved me unconditionally. So because he loved me, I could do this. This is the kind of justification. He loves me, so I can write about him, which is like in hindsight, horribly selfish, horribly blind. But at the time, I thought I had interrogated enough. I had done so much work with all the characters, but I think I kind of pulled my foot off the pedal a little bit for my dad because he was my last living parent and he loved me. I think he, as a Korean man of a certain generation, didn't really understand the difference between autobiography and memoir. I think he felt that the word was extremely significant and powerful. So if I portrayed him, that was very powerful.
So, what is this next memoir about then?
It's just this. It's about revision. It's about the ethics of writing about other people. It's about what happened when I launched my book and my dad passed unexpectedly 2 weeks after my book was out, and sort of the realizations that I came to overnight about my motivations for the success of Docile, what I wanted in portraying my father, and the new kind of perspective that I had after all of this that happened literally overnight. And so the book is very much about revision and the parameters that memoir gives us.
It sounds powerful. It sounds wonderful. Well, it's really been a pleasure, everybody. Docile. It's such a fantastic read. And we didn't even talk about all your wonderful use of metaphor and simile. It just has all the language, the use of language that really makes a story come alive. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Estelle.
Follow me at EstelleSerasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.